Now we're going to do number 3 in the Chapter 6 Quiz 1 Video Solution Key. So the only one variable has been declared, and that's the loop control variable. It's going to be the counter so that we can decide when the loop stops. And so x is 1, and so we're doing a for loop now. So you enter in the front, and then so 1 is so x is equal. X is not 1. X is actually 0, as it says right here. So this has been initialized here, assigned. Then you go here, and then you go to the middle. So you do these two right now. And so x is less than 10. 0 is less than 10, which is true. So you jump into the for loop. Well, the first line is an if statement. Is 0 less than 2? Well, that's true. So you jump inside the if clause. The first line says to print apples. So you print apples. Now, the next line down is to increment the loop control variable, and so that's going to become 1. Okay, this is an if else structure, so we are now done with that part of it. So we're going to go below the if structure, which ends here. This is the end of the if structure, and the next line down is a brace that ends the while loop or the for loop and tells us to go back up. Now when you come to the for loop, now after we've gone through it once, we're always going to come in through the back end. You only go the first and the second thing twice. Now we're going to go from the third to the second. So it's 3 to the second. So here we are. We're going to increment. So x becomes 2. Okay, then you hop on over to the middle because you got to get it tested to see if you're going to go through the loop or not. Well, 2 is less than 10. And so we're going to jump right back in here. And is 2 less than 2? Because that's what x is right now. Well, it's not. So we're going to jump down here and skip the if and go to else. Is 2 less than 7? Well, yes it is. So we're going to jump into the else if clauses. Well, the first sentence here tells us to print worms. So we print worms. The next line down after this print statement is to increment x. So we've got to do this line right here. And so we increment x and it becomes 3. The next line down is the end of the else if. So we're done with the if else structure. So now we go down below the last line of the if else structure to the brace that says while loop. And this tells us to go back to the end of the for loop. So it tells us to go back to the for statement. Again, we enter from the back end. To do that, now we're going to increment x. And so it becomes 4. Then we hop on over to the second because we got to test it out. And x right now is 4, and 4 is still less than 10. So now we go from the center, the test, to the body of the for loop. Well, from here on out, x is going to keep continuing to get higher, so the if is always going to be false. This is going to now become false all the time. So we're going to go to the else if and see, well, what does this do? Well, the 4, x is 4, and that's less than 7. So we're going to go down in here into the else if clauses, and we're going to print worms. Now, after the line that says to print worms is the line that says to increment x. So we've got to do this line again. It tells us to increment x, so let's do it. And then, next line down is the end of the else if structure. Go down here to outside of it, and the next line down is the ending for loop brace. Tells us to go back up to 4. We come in from the back end all the time now, and so x is incremented again. So it's 6, and so 6 is less than 10. You should see the pattern here going on. And so you jump in here. As we said, this is always false now, and so we go to the else if, and 6 is less than 7. You should be able to tell now this is going to be the last time that this is going to work. So this is the last time we print worms. The next line down after telling us to print worms is the command to increment x. So we increment it. We're done with the if-else structure. We go to the brace, go back up, come in from the back end. We increment x again, and now we're at 8. 8 is still less than 10. So we jump in, and of course this is false, and then this now is false because 8 is not less than 7. So now we're going to go to the else and just catch everything else. So else is here, and we go, the first thing it tells us to do is to print holes. After holes, there's another statement that we've got to do. We're going to assign x, we're going to assign it the value of x, which is 8, plus 2. So we're going to assign it 10. The next line down is the ending brace for the else. In fact, the ending for the whole if-else structure. So the next line down is the ending for loop brace, which tells us to go back up to the for statement, come in from the back end, increment x. We now have 11. Then you go to the test. Again, 11 is not less than 10. So we are now done with this for loop. So we got to go here and come all the way out of the for loop. So we go to the first statement after the for loop. Here's the end of the for loop. The first statement after that says to print the value of x, because there's no quotation marks. Well, the value of x right now is 11. It's necessary because that's what made this loop stop, because of 11 being less than 10. So that's very necessary that it did turn 11. And that is number 3. Now we're going to look at number 4, and we can see in here that we have 2 variables that have been initialized, num1 and num2 that are 0 and 6. X has been declared, so it's over here with an empty memory location, and then we start the for loop. So for the first time through, you got to do the first argument, which is assign 1 to x. So now it's been assigned. Then you always go to the middle before you jump out of it. So 1 is less than 5, and so we're going to go into the for loop. The first statement in the for loop is to assign num1 to whatever num2 is, which is 6, times whatever x is, which is 1. So num1 is assigned 6. The next line down tells us to print num1. Well, that's 6 right now. The next line down is the end of the for loop, so we go back to the for statement. We come in from the back end now because we've already been through it once. Now forever we're going to go into the back end. We increment x and it becomes 2. Then we go over to the middle because you always have to go to the middle before you go into the loop. And 2 is less than 5, so we jump back into the for loop and we take num1 and assign it to whatever num2 is, which is still 6. And so it's 6 times whatever x is, which is now 2. The next line down tells us to print num1. Well, I didn't change that though. 6 times 2 is 12, so num1 is now 12. And now, in the next line down, we're asked to print num1, which is 12. Next line down is the end of the for loop. We go back up to the for statement, come in from the back end, and it tells us to increment x, so we do. We jump over to the testing location, and 3 is less than 5. We go in here again, assign number 1 to num2, which is 6, and then instead of 2 it's times 3. We should begin to see a pattern here. So that's going to be, now we print, and num1 is now going to be 18, because 6 times 3 is 18. And again, we're going to print num1. Well, that num1, and I just did the wrong thing. Okay, I cleaned it up here a little bit. So 6 times 3, because that's num2 is 6, and then the x is incremented to 3, so that becomes 18. The next line down says to print 18, so num1. So we're going to, why am I doing that? So I shouldn't be canceling these out. Okay, so now we print 18 here. The next line down is the brace that tells us the end of the for loop and go back up to the for statement. So we come in from the back end again and increment x. So now it's 4. Well, 4 is less than 5 still, so we jump into the loop, and num1 is assigned whatever num2 is, which is just staying 6 all the time. The only thing that's changing is this x. So now we're going to get another multiple of 6. So num1 is assigned 24. The next line down says to print the value of num1. Well, it's 24. The next line down is the end of the for loop and tells us to go back up to the for statement, come in from the back end, and increment x. So x is now 5, and then we enter into the test. Is 5 less than 5? Well, no, it's not. So we're done. So now with the for loop, so now we kick out of the for loop. That means we go to the first line following its closing brace. And this closing line says to print x. So we're going to print x. Well, x right now is 5. So we print it. So you should know at this point that the value of the count control variable is always going to be more, or is always going to make the test be false. So that's your answer right there. Okay, so now number 5 is right here. I'm not going to really explain this. I'm just going to show it to you. You can pause the video and see what the answer key, see where things are going. Just remember, the things that are going in here is what's being repeated. So you have to ask every person what their grade level is, and so you have to start with that, because that's the first thing that's going to be repeated. The last thing is going to be to go through that if-else structure, and then you alter the variable. The next one is number 6, and number 6 here is the for loop. It's the same principle. So you just have the count control variable. It's assigned, not assigned, it's just declared. Here's your for loop, your curly braces, in the same kind of idea as the while loop. And that's it.